Hello everybody, how are you guys? It's time for another video in our Denver series. We've extended it to the following week. There's just so much to talk about in this great town. And in this video, we're going to look at a snapshot history of the Denver Broncos. And sports being such a big part of Denver, one of the leading sports towns in the country. And the NFL team in any city is, of course, going to have a very high profile even among the major league sports. So the Broncos are a big part of the fabric of this city. So this video is going to just go over some of the highlights in Broncos history. I can't say that it's an exact science. I did the research, but I don't remember things well. So if I can't think of the actual facts in my research, I'm just going to make it up as I go along because that's going to be a lot easier for me. So most of this, let's be honest, is going to be made up, just so you know before you get deep into the video. So the Broncos were founded in 1959. Now it's interesting because the original name was going to be called the Denver Burrs, B-R-S, alluding to the cold weather in Denver. It was also meant to somewhat strike fear in the hearts of at least the warm weather teams, like the Raiders and those kind of California pansies that don't really know how to play in the cold, are afraid of the cold, whine to their mothers about the cold. So Denver Burrs, and everybody in the stands would put their arms across their chests and shake their body like brrr, and that was their team, you could say their theme or their motto or their song, in a sense, chant, you could say. So whether it struck fear in the hearts of the other teams, it remains to be seen. But then they extended the name. They changed the name. They figured that was a little bit too limiting. So they just added an O. So then for many years, at least for several years, it was the Denver Bros, B-R-O, the Denver Bros. And again, they had a theme song. They had a chant. I think it went, Denver Bros, when we come down the field, you're going to go down to hell, ring the bell. Something like that. And then a guy would ring the bell, bong, bong. And it was supposed to, again, strike fear in the hearts of the enemy. And that was the Denver Bros. Now, eventually they added an N, the Denver Bronze. And this was short for the Denver Bronchitises because they wanted to get that cold weather theme going. And they figured, okay, well, what could you get if you stay out in the cold too long? And what if you were under the pressure of our awesome offense for too long? Then you get bronchitis, okay, bronze, the Denver Bronze. And as a tie-in, they would come out with medical masks on, and again, just trying to be like fearsome, awesome, and again, with mixed reaction. Then they added the C, the Denver Bronx, okay? And in this case, they tried to get a tie-in to the Bronx in New York because some of the original founders were born and raised in the Bronx. So they said, let's call it the Bronx. We already have all the other letters, and we'll make them fearful of us by alluding to some of the street life in the Bronx and how that can be kind of scary. And again, maybe mixed response from the fans and the enemy. And finally, they added the second O, the Denver Broncos. And that's what it's been ever since. And that what changed probably happened sometime in the mid-'80s. I cannot exactly remember. But they are a expansion team. So you had the original NFL, and they added a bunch of teams. The New York Wall Streets, the Chicago Midways, the Atlanta Can't Find My Cars. All those teams were added to the league later, and the Denver Broncos was one of those teams in 1959. And they play at Myler Stadium. Now, Myler Stadium is a stadium that was built by joggers that run miles as a matter of course, and they don't run any farther. They run exactly 1 mile. So all of the bricks that you see in the building, those were laid by joggers, milers running with a brick in hand. They'd lay it laid in there. A professional brick mason would then put it onto the building. So the suppliers were all these joggers running between the quarries and then the stadium itself when it was built, Myler Stadium there. So the Broncos have had a very tight relationship with the town over the years, and partly that's because the city charter for the team said that the players had to live with a local family, much like you would if you were a foreign exchange student. So, and we're talking about veterans and rookies alike, and not only that, not just the team members, but also the coaching staff. Each have to move in with a different family around the Denver area. The idea is to grow those local ties and really let the fans get up close and personal with their favorite players. Now, there have been incidences where a player who is living with a local family, just like they are asked to and told to and must do as part of their contract, started to bridle under the constraints. So what you had was some starting quarterbacks who were told by the mother of the house that they had to be home by 5:30 for dinner and washed up and ready to go, or they weren't going to eat. Now, you're talking about professional athletes that if they don't get enough calories and nutrients, they're just not going to be any good on the following Sunday. So over the time, they modified that rule, and at least some of the star players didn't have to stay with families. And instead, they all moved into their own house called the Bronco base. And man, the stories that are coming out now about that original Bronco base, which was a condo complex where they took over 4 or 5 of the condos. Some of those stories are still ringing through the high plains up there, and probably 2 or 3 people should be incarcerated, but we don't know. So it all got swept under this, all before social media, thank the Lord. So probably the legacy of the Broncos is a team of cunning and guile. So they never were the biggest team or the fastest or the most skilled, but they were the most cunning and they had the most guile. And guile is sort of like cunning, but if you're lacking sleep. If you're cunning, you have plenty of sleep, you're charged up, you've eaten dinner, you're rested. But if you get tired, you fall back on the guile. And the Broncos were able to do that very effectively over the years. Now, they've won 3 Super Bowls, and 2 of them probably were deserved. The one, they won because the other team didn't show up for the first half. And by the time they played the second half, the other team was way too far behind, and the Broncos were ahead by 45 points just after that one half of play. The other 2 Super Bowls that they were in, they've won 3. They won 1 by playing only 50% of the game, as I mentioned. And the other 2 they won, but they probably didn't deserve it because in the one game, the Broncos were able to leverage because the game was in Denver. That one game, that one Super Bowl was in Denver. That the Broncos were able to leverage their hometown associations and contacts with organized crime by getting the unions to pump the air out of the stadium so it was very thin, so that it wasn't any different than the surrounding mile-high air outside. And so the other team, the Broncos, are used to that. They love it. In fact, they prefer to have even thinner air because they think it makes their skin look good, and a lot of those guys are pretty vain. But the other teams could barely breathe, and so the Broncos won that one game just based on the air pumping. Now, the authorities and the referees in the NFL found out about it, so they cut that out for the other win. But they really didn't deserve the other win either, because what they did was they got their contacts in the concession stand business to throw Smarties and chocolate-covered peanuts and all kinds of stuff onto the stadium, onto the field, so that the other team couldn't really get the traction they needed to make a stand against the Broncos. So you'd see these referees coming out to quote-unquote measure a first down for the other team. But meanwhile, they're dumping Smarties and gumdrops and all kinds of candies onto the ground, rubber worms, all kinds of stuff out of their pockets of their striped shirts. And that created a impossible service for any kind of running back to make a stand, to make a showing, and use their skills. Now, the defense the offensive line at one point did try to bring out a standard snow shovel to scoop up the candies and all those gums and everything, but they were called 10-yard penalty for winter snow removal equipment on the field. So you're getting a picture of what the Broncos are all about, what their strengths are and weaknesses. I think over the years they found that cunning and guile was not enough, because the players these days, the NFL guys, are so much bigger and faster than any previous generation. So you can only use your smarts so much. Eventually you got to go up and bang heads and get yards the old-fashioned way, which is clearing out of space and running through it. So the Broncos have been less effective at doing that. Now, partly that's because they weren't able to clear a space real well. They didn't have the size, nor did they have the knowledge. Because once you start relying on tricks and cunning, then you start to diminish your skills in good old-fashioned smash-mouth football. So they only really learned how to clear the line, clear a space that the running back can then dance through on his tippy toes. They really only learned to do that by playing the Raiders, because the Raiders, no matter how they were doing, were a team that were, very familiar with the street, very familiar with taking control of a game by intimidation and causing injury to the other team, purposefully trying to hurt and injure the other team so they couldn't play their best players. So the Raiders, in contrast to the Broncos, their whole strategy was to try to injure the entire starting lineup by the end of the first half, so that they had to use their scrubs in the second half, and then they tried to win the game that way. The Broncos never stooped that low, but they did learn some, street techniques from the Raiders, and they employed those, and were able to, win. When they had their winning seasons and their Super Bowl seasons, they were able to use some of those techniques. Because one thing a good team or a championship team knows is that they can't get cocky. They can't think they're know-it-alls. They can't think they're God's gift to football, because Mother Nature and the gods of football will slam you down faster than you can say Denver Burrs. So that's one thing they never let get to their head, and that's based on superior coaching, of course, but also the knowledge of just their own experience. So the farm team for the Broncos for the first, I'd say, 20 years were the Fort Collins Tall Boys. And those players were really good. They were all like 6'10" and above. And so very good receivers, very good quarterback. Not so good on the line because they didn't have the broad shoulders. They had the skinny shoulders of a tall guy. And sometimes when they'd lean into these big, beefy guys on the other team, they would just puncture their sharp shoulders right through their skin. And now, sometimes it would stab the big, beefy guy in the neck, and a couple of them bled to death out on the field. But for the most part, you don't need big, tall guys at the line. You need stout, beefy guys. They look like they've had 14 hamburgers during every time they go back to the bench. So the Broncos were relying on that farm team too much, and they decided to move it. And so then they went to the Aurora Borealises, and that's been their farm team ever since. And this is the team that specializes in using the lights and the brightness of the Aurora Borealis to blind the other team and make headway on the field that way, using a series of lasers and mirrors above the stadium. So the Broncos are such a unique and high-profile team in the NFL. They've often been accused of being a little too cozy with the NFL because there's been some controversies where it seemed like the Broncos were cheating. And when they were approached about it, the Broncos just said, "Hey, who do you think we are, New England?" Right? That was a lot of people say that was just a diversionary tactic by alluding to the New England Patriots, who not only cheat on the field and cheat in practice, they cheat they cheat. If they go to the buffet and are told you can only have one plate of food and maybe come back one time, they'll come back 8 times. They don't care. They just cheat as a matter of, the way that's how they run their team. And of course, it's been very effective for them. But the Broncos never got developed that skill. It's a skill to be able to cheat and get away with it. That's definitely a skill, and it has to be nurtured over time. So that, guys, I hope that gives you that's pretty much it. I hope that gives you an overall snapshot of the Broncos. We're going to have so many more videos on this team because they really should be better than they are right now. They should be better than they are. And other teams want them to be better so they can say they beat one of the best. But right now they're making mistakes. They're not drafting properly. They have people in the wrong positions. They've got people from the concessions. They've been bringing in, like the guy that fills your beer at the concession stand. The one game last year, they brought him in for 2 quarters just because he says he knew all of the plays from serving beer to people in the stands for so many years. He knew the playbook inside and out, and sure enough, he did. The only problem was when he got the football, he wouldn't throw the football. He'd pull some beers out of his pants and throw the beers. He'd throw a little pony keg or a 12-pack to the receiver. And if the receiver wasn't ready, here comes a little pony keg to the head, bonk, and the injuries were piling up. So, they tried to fix it, but they'll figure it out. We're going to have a lot more videos on the Broncos, guys. We're going to really enjoy some of the things we're going to look at some of the players from the past. We're going to talk to some of the people in town, see what they think of the Broncos. We're going to have live interviews and all kinds of fun stuff. And then, of course, we're going to do the other teams in town, the Rockies and the Avalanche and the Nuggets. So come on back. We'll see you then.